Let's get started. Okay, so we're going through SOC 2 compliance. We're using the Lionfish platform to be able to, identify, recognize each of these controls. We're going to also use the platform to store the controls, the evidence of the controls, because you have to have evidence to show your auditor. And then you can pass a SOC 2 audit and become SOC 2 certified. This is one of the certifications that requires that you pay someone, a third party who's SOC 2, capable of enabling you to become a SOC 2 compliant company, and therefore you have to pay a third party to do that. You can't self-attest or just go through the controls and believe that you're SOC 2 compliant because you've met them all. You have to actually have an auditor come in and ensure that you're SOC 2 compliant. Let's start off at to meet its objectives, the entity uses detection and monitoring procedures to identify changes to configurations that result in the introduction of new vulnerabilities and susceptibilities to newly discovered vulnerabilities. So here you have to have two pieces of software. The first one is called an RMM, Remote Monitoring and Management, and that's like a Ninja or SolarWinds or Spiceworks or something like that, that monitors your network and identifies changes to your configuration. You could set some of these that say, if any configuration changes are made to my environment, then I'll be alerted by it. The second thing you need is a vulnerability scanner, like Tenable, IO, or Nessus, and that vulnerability scanner goes through your environment and scans it for vulnerabilities. And so if you make a change and the vulnerability scanner then fires off and detects the change has created a vulnerability, then you have to remediate that vulnerability as they appear. And that's what you would do. If you had Windows devices, you would use the RMM tool maybe with an agent. But if you have like firewalls and switches and routers, you're going to use your vulnerability manager, your vulnerability scanner, to detect if any of the changes you've made by upgrading the firmware or making any kind of a change to like your firewall to open a port, that the vulnerability scanner detects any changes that can happen on hard devices versus ones that have agents on them that could possibly report back to you without running a scan on them. The entity monitors system components and the operation of those components for anomalies that are indicative of malicious acts, natural disasters, and errors affecting the entity's ability to meet its objectives. Anomalies are analyzed to determine whether they represent security events. So you're going to monitor your environment physically and by, with your RMM tool. So this is saying that you will also monitor for like malicious acts. Malicious acts are performed by humans, not by, most likely not by a computer. So a malicious act would be something that an individual would produce. A natural disaster is obviously not produced by computers. So it's something that you have to take into account, that you're monitoring for. You're monitoring the weather, you're monitoring your employees' behavior to make sure that they're not going to create problems. Like if there's a hurricane and your fence goes down or your camera system goes offline, those are going to be anomalies that are going to affect you that you need to possibly take a look at to see what you can do to remediate those before they become issues, or have a backup generator or something like that in place to ensure that your operations are not disrupted very much. The entity evaluates security events to determine whether they could or have resulted in a failure of the entity to meet its objectives, security incidents, and if so, take action to prevent or address such failures. So every year you're going to have to run an incident response plan. You're going to have to run your incident response. So you're going to come up with, either if you don't have any security events, you're going to make some up. Like you could have a hurricane, you could have a rogue employee, you could have malware as like these pretend events that occur if you're not having the events occur. And if during the pretend event you're gonna have to sit down with your team and you're gonna have to explain to them what happened, and they're gonna have to tell you what it is that they would do to remediate the problem. If you actually had a problem, you would sit down with your team and you would talk about what was done as a problem issue, and you would resolve it in that meeting, or you would come up with solutions in the meeting that need to be implemented. And then that whole entire process needs to be documented. The fake tests once a quarter, and the real tests, if you ever have them, they need to be documented, because you have to have a ticketing system where the event was reported to the ticketing system. You have to have a security incident response meeting. You have to have the results of that meeting come produces documentation. And in that documentation, it may create or spawn tasks for you to perform to prevent or address the failure. The entity responds to identified security incidents by executing a defined incident response program to understand, contain, remediate, and communicate security incidents as appropriate. So you have to have a security incident response plan. Jeremy and I have one that's generic. We could send you if you want it. Just ask for it. And the response plan is pretty in depth. It goes over everything that could happen, from natural disaster to a breach of a PCI, PCI being breached, or HIPAA being breached, or something like that. So we have an incident response plan. You don't have to come up with it, but I would use that as a template for what you would customize it to your own company's requirements and needs. And then you would go through. It tells you how to go through step by step and remediate incidents, and then you have to keep track of them and report them into your ticketing system, and then ultimately they'll end up here as a incident that occurred, or your response plan is included in this control. The entity identifies, develops, and implements activities to recover from identified security incidents. So if you have if you have a natural disaster, you're going to have to create a disaster recovery plan. If you have a person who's acting erratically or does espionage against your organization, your HR department's going to have a how to respond to that, termination, filing lawsuits, that kind of thing. So you want to have canned responses that you're going to do in the event of an issue. So again, for your organization, you can have a business continuity plan, a BCP, or you can have a disaster recovery plan, DRP. So business continuity can include things that are outside the computer realm, like individuals acting erratically, or disasters or storms, or whatever, or a police issue, someone breaks into your office. You're going to want to have canned responses, and so that's what you're going to put in here as the evidence that you can do that. The entity authorizes, designs, develops, or acquires, configures, documents, tests, approves, and implements changes to infrastructure, software, and procedures to meet its objectives. So you're going to want to have what's called a change control process. Your change control process is going to include change control items that are like the following. First, you have to have a change control document. Then you're going to have a change control meeting that you're going to have with your team. Then you're going to have a change control plan. Then you're going to have a change. You're going to also have a plan that includes a back out. So if the change doesn't work, you're going to back out of that change. And then you're going to have plan out how you're going to back out of it. You're going to want to go through all these different change control items, like testing, approval, implementation, and all that should be in your document. It all should be laid out in the change control doc, and it should be signed. That's what the approvals are. It should be signed at the bottom and dated. And it talks about risk and what the change is for, what it does, what it's good for. So you're gonna have a whole entire change control process that talks about all these different parts, and during your meeting you're going to go over all these with your change control board. Your change control board technically be you and yourself, and just, that you go over all these things and you document them for yourself. But if you have a larger organization, which you probably do when you have a board of directors company, you're going to go through a change control meeting with the appropriate group, like engineering or executives, or you're going to want to invite at least one of them from every group into your change control meeting and hold a change control session where you go over all these things and document them. So that is a lot of paperwork that goes into this, where you have to invite people to the change control meeting. You have to have the change control meeting. You have to go over the change controls. You have to have them approved. You have to schedule them. And then you might even have to communicate out to the company what changes you're making. The entity identifies, selects, and develops risk mitigation activities for risks arising from potential business disruptions. Again, Jeremy and I have a risk plan. We have a risk methodology, a risk document you can borrow from us, and it'll go over all the things you need to do in step-by-step fashion for this particular control. But you need to ensure that you mitigate risk and that you go over all the different kinds of risks that could occur. One of the risks that I found was interesting was some currency in a foreign country was fluctuating, and that's what the company identified that as risk. So they reduced the amount of money they had in the bank at that company due to the risk assessment in order for, not to lose value in that money. And they did, and the money went down quite significantly, and they mitigated that risk by, having a minimal amount of money in that bank account in order to pay staff and team members there. They didn't have a larger amount, which they normally did, in order to cover those things. So they just made balance transfers at a different interval. But that was an interesting risk assessment. Someone looked at that and said, hey, this country's got some problems and their currency might fluctuate. They have a meeting, everybody discussed it. They discussed what to do. The answer was to reduce the amount of money in their foreign bank account, and they did that, and that saved them quite a bit of money. The entity assesses and manages risk associated with vendors and business partners. So if you see that VMware is going through turmoil, you may want to talk about it with your organization and say, hey, look, VMware is kind of bouncing around. It's not doing well anymore. Something's wrong. All these articles are popping up about VMware not doing well in the marketplace, this and that. You may want to have a discussion. You may want to say, okay, what are we going to do? You may reduce your VMware footprint. You may switch over to a different virtualization engine. You might go to hypervisor. You might start switching over to hypervisor because you feel like it's not going to get any better. But you're going to have these discussions with your group, your organization. You're going to have, like, you could use your change control board members as an alternate group to just discuss risk management, or you might have a separate risk group. And in that risk group, you talk about things like VMware not being viable in the marketplace, or the fact that Nutanix is moving away, or whatever. And you talk about those things, and then you make up an assessment, and you say, look, we had this risk assessment meeting. We talked about the fact that our vendors like VMware or Microsoft or Twitter or whatever are not doing well or changing their business model, and we don't align with that. So we need to make changes based on that. And this is all about people who you do business with, who you buy products from. And if they're about to go out of business or bankrupt, you might need to make changes there as well. So you got to keep your eye on your vendors and business partners, the health of them and their long-term viability, and then you have to make decisions based on how you feel that's gonna go. The entity maintains, monitors, and evaluates current processing capacity and use of system components to manage capacity demand and to enable the implementation of additional capacity to meet its objectives. So your remote monitoring and management tool is going to be sitting there watching your CPU utilization, your memory utilization, your disk utilization. It's going to be watching all three of those things constantly. And then at the end of the month, you can run a report that says, okay, our CPU utilization is always at 80%. It's always at 75%, 80, 90%. It's really high. So you're going to say, okay, what are we going to do? What do we do about that? And so say it's legitimate. Say it's a SQL Server, or it's some program, Sage or whatever. It's using up all that data. It's using up all that memory. It's using CPU, and you're like, oh man, what are we going to do? How are we going to mitigate this? So you're going to have to come up with a plan on how to fix that. It could be that you add another piece of equipment and it's on standby, in the event that you need more capacity, or you buy more RAM in anticipation of it going, being needed to be used higher. You get a machine with more CPUs and you migrate over to it, or you move to the cloud where it's more extremely flexible, where you can increase drive space and CPU utilization. You can quickly and easily move machines around, or scale. I knew a company that had web servers that were self-contained, but they shared the as part of a round robin scenario with a load balancer. But the front end of the web server was very fluid to the back end, which means that you could use multiple web servers in the environment and it would all feed off the same back end, and it would, you were able to use transactions, and the load balancer would flip between each of the three web servers, blah blah blah, and it would go on and say, okay, all of a sudden one of the web servers was full, and it couldn't pass it over to the other two because they were full as well. So what would you do? Well, there was a script that would run that said if it was at certain amount of utilization, spawn a new machine, and it would spin up a new web server. Again, they were self-contained, so they could handle there being multiples of them. And then the load balancer would also be told, hey, there's a new member, start passing data over to that because the other ones are full or at capacity, and so on and so forth. And that's how this person was able to spin up, during like a holiday season, they were able to spin up 30 or 40 additional web servers to take on more orders. And then when the holiday season was over, they spun them down, and because they didn't need them anymore. And so when they had a capacity, or were at capacity, they were able to scale out. Now that's harder to do when you have an organization. So you're going to want to keep, if you have a situation where it's dynamic, like a web environment, a web server, you might want to always move that to the cloud. If it's static, more like you have 12 workers in your office and they're all using Sage at the same time, and that whenever that happens, you use a certain amount of RAM, a certain amount of CPU on average. You're going to want to probably compensate for that by increasing your capacity. The entity authorizes, designs, develops, or acquires, implements, operates, approves, maintains, and monitors environmental protections, software, data backup processes, and recovery infrastructure to meet its objectives. So this is talking about having backups, antivirus, RMM, vulnerability scanning, and you're going to want to make sure that that's all implemented, it's all working, it operates, that you make sure that you monitor your backups and your environment is protected. So this talks about like 5 different components. But you want to primarily make sure that you protect your environment and that all of those protections are maintained and functional, and that you have backups and you have recovery, and that you test your backups out by doing backup recovery, which is the next one. The entity tests recovery plan procedures supporting system recovery to meet its objectives. I would do this every month, actually. I would run a backup restore every month, and so that you just back up your data and then have somebody choose at random a file that you know is being backed up, and then restore it, and then put that evidence of that restore into the platform. And whenever someone comes by to look at your environment, they see that you are restoring your data on a regular basis. At the worst case scenario, I would do it every quarter. I wouldn't do it every year. I wouldn't do it every 6 months. I would do it every quarter at the minimum. Every month is great. Every month is simple. You just do a restore job. You include it in your backup job routine. You just choose a different file each time you run a restore job. You show it to your executives. It's going to give everyone peace of mind. And a month is really all I would ever want to go for having lost any data. If I lost data from a month or more, it'd be tough. So try to recover every month. If you want to recover every week, that's a little extreme, but that's going to show you at least. I know a customer who backs up their audit accounting database because after 3 days, a backup failed on their accounting database, and you know, they lost the data from one whole entire for a 3-day period, and it was a disaster. It was literally a disaster because of the fact that they had to re-enter all their bills and go back and look at all their invoices they sent out. There was literally hundreds of them. So having to re-enter all that by hand was painful. Imagine having to do that for a month. So they were all about testing their backups on a daily basis if it was restorable. So that was just the end of the day for somebody. The last 15 minutes of the day is just to do a restore job from their backup and check and see if it worked. I know it seems extreme, but when you have that many transactions, you want to do some backup and recovery tests on a frequent basis. The entity identifies and maintains confidential information to meet the entity's objectives related to confidentiality. So you want to make sure that you encrypt your data, you encrypt all of your information that is confidential, that you mark it as confidential. There's marking software. There's also watermarks that you can put in to your information that says it's confidential. You want to make sure that at the beginning, when someone logs into their computer, they're presented with a confidentiality statement, and that they it says by logging in you agree to understand that information within the corporation is confidential. You might also want to include confidential statements inside of your um, inside of your email, so that you could put at the end of your email that you have confidentiality parameters that you need to put in there. So email, login, watermarks, encryption. The entities disposes of confidential information to meet the entity's objectives related to confidentiality. Again, you remove data um, by disposing of it, by destroying it, either through a shredding application or something similar to that, or you dispose of it in a certain way, um, depending on how it is your organization handles confidential data. So you can have a confidential data policy, and when you have that, it'll include how to create it, how to handle it, where to store it, and then ultimately how to get rid of it and destroy it. The entity obtains or generates, uses, and communicates relevant quality information regarding the objectives related to processing, including definitions of data processed and product and service specifications to support the use of products and services. What this means is that um, you need to have a rating system of your data. So one might be, level one might be like just information that's public. Level two might be internal information. Level three might be confidential data, and level four might be maybe even higher, or secret, or force, IP, company IP. And you're going to want to create a your data handling process that says, here are the different types of data that I have in my organization. Here is where it's stored. Here's where we store like type 1 data. Here's where we store like type 2 data. And here is where here's who has access to type 1 data. Here is who has access to type 2 data. Here is how we encrypt type 2 data, or here's where data is stored that is type 2 and above is encrypted, and so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that, especially for product specifications and products and services that are confidential or proprietary, that you classify that as like type 3 or 4 data, and that you have that data stored in the appropriate locations, that only certain people have access to it, and that that you that you document that whole entire process, what it all means, and you put that evidence in here for this control. The entity implements policies and procedures over system inputs, including controls over completeness and accuracy, to result in products, services, and reporting to meet the entity's objectives. Again, you're going to have a set of policies and procedures. They range from how to questionnaires for vendors, um, how to access control groups, um, data classification, like we just talked about, that you're going to have all these policies and procedures, password policies, remote control policies, um, bring your own device policies, mobile device policies. You're going to have, literally, there are hundreds of policies out there, and they're going to support how you manage your organization and how your products and services are affected by those policies and procedures. What they are is up to you, because you have your objectives. If you have a lot of engineers who are using their own devices, you may have a BYOD policy, bring your own device policy, and that might include a strict list of software that is allowed or not allowed. If you have a lot of users going out to the internet and going to Facebook, and doing Facebook all day, you might want to make a policy or a process that prevents that from happening on your firewall, or limits the amount of access that they can have to Facebook on a certain regular basis to increase productivity. You might have it so that you have certain people allowed in certain parts of your building, and so on and so forth. So you have to have all your policies and procedures based on the makeup of your company. If your company requires different levels of access, different kinds of data, different information given out to individuals who perform different services, then you need to document all that. Documents can be from 1 to 100. I've seen somebody put everything in one document, which was tough, but they put it in there. At least they were able to move it to each and every one of these individual folders, and then just point at the section. They would say, see section 2.1 of my security policy document, and for this particular control. But for the most part, you would create all these different documents. All the documents have to follow a certain type of format. It needs to have, which we can share with you as well, Jeremy. I have that format. It talks about the policy. It talks about the reason why you have the policy. It talks about what the policy entails and does, and et cetera, et cetera. You sign out the bottom of it. The entity implements policies and procedures over system processing to result in product, services, and reporting to meet the entity's objectives. Again, your system processing is your computer environment. So you're going to ensure that your computers are all capable of performing all the different activities that are needed to make sure that your products and services are able to be presented and given to your customers, and that you want to make sure that you have like a multi-factor authentication policy, because that supports the fact that you're not going to be compromised. But you want to have it so that all your policies and procedures that you created before also include policies and procedures that revolve around your computer environment. The entity implements policies and procedures to make available or deliver output completely, accurately, and timely in accordance with specifications to meet the entity's objectives. So again, your processes, your policies and procedures, you're going to want to make sure that it makes an accurate and complete representation of your services, in a timely manner. Now, this can also surround a little bit of the fact that if you have like a web environment, you want to make sure that however your web environment is set up, that when somebody asks for something or requests something from that environment, that the way that you set up your environment will allow for accurate delivery of information. Here's an example. If somebody requests their order history, you would make sure that however you set up your information systems, that when they asked for it, they got their order history, not someone else's. And so you want to make sure that that goes into effect for the privacy policy, where their particular data is presented to them, or if they want to see how their information is being stored in your environment, you can accurately show them that. Um, a lot of this goes around the fact that people who want, for GDPR and all these other services, people who want their personal data, the accurate representation of it and how it's stored in your system, you need to be able to show them that their information is being stored and accurately give them, that particular uh, that workflow, or that evidence of it being stored properly and accurately. So you want to make sure that if someone asks, someone's credit card number is not being superimposed on someone else's, or it's incorrectly being represented inside of your systems. That's for a web environment. There are all different kinds of policies and procedures for different types of services and products that you're going to need to put into effect to deliver, completely and accurate output. And it's a difficult one, but it's a situational one as well, because it's like, how do I do that? This can be changed for like 11 or 12 different things. A product could have 11 or 12 different ways to perform for this particular control. It's very difficult control to meet. The entity implements policies and procedures to store inputs, items in processing, and outputs completely, accurately, and timely in accordance with system specifications to meet the entity's objectives. So in that web example, if somebody puts in their personal information, it's processed by your system and it comes out the other side complete and accurate. So if, for instance, I am putting in my personal information, it then recognizes me as a person that needs Tylenol as a drug, and I agree. That's what I'm trying to get here. I'm trying to get Tylenol. I put my name in, and Tylenol is what I want. It should come out the other side where it says your order has been completed. You ordered Tylenol. This is how much you wanted, and it comes out, immediately, and it says, okay, there you go. Here's your order of Tylenol. And then when I come back in tomorrow, I said, what did I order yesterday? It says you ordered Tylenol yesterday. You ordered one container of it, and here is what it is. You paid for it, and you use the credit card ending with these 4 numbers. And that's how you meet that control for like a web order, for instance. And there are other ways of doing it for other particular products, but that's an example of something where someone has an input. You want to make sure that your processes, your policies, and your procedures that you have set up for your organization allow for the fact that when I order Tylenol, it says that I ordered it. I can look at it tomorrow and it'll still say I ordered it, when I ordered it, what time, how much, what quantity, and it spits it out for you. So that's it. Any questions for anyone? But those are some difficult controls to meet because of the fact that you have to understand what you're delivering as a service, or what you're delivering as a product, or what you're selling as on your site. And you have to make sure that your policies and procedures support the accurate delivery of those things in a timely manner, and that they're always correct. If you have a product that you sell on a website, it can be a lot easier than if you have a product that or a service. The services are a little harder because they can vary per, by customer type, by um by vendor type, such other things like that. Like if you're selling servers to somebody. Any questions? Anything? So we went over a lot of different things today, like RMM, remote monitoring management, vulnerability management, ticketing, change control management, policies and procedures. It is an intense amount of stuff. It's like one of those things brings up like 10 items that you have to have a ticketing system, you have to have a data classification system, you have to have a lot of stuff. That's why SOC 2 compliance takes months, sometimes months to complete, 4 to 5 months. That's why the auditor charges like $18,000 to $24,000 per audit session, because they go over hundreds of pieces of documents. They have to review them all, and they may suggest that you change the wording or things like that. But for the most part, there's no wrong answer to a policy. If your password policy is like 8 characters long, et cetera, et cetera, one special character, that kind of thing, 99% of the time, they're not going to shoot it down. They're not going to say, no, no, we don't like this policy. But they will, and once in a while, like on level of encryption, or if your wireless doesn't use like some weaker type of encryption, they may want you to increase it. But for the most part, if you have a policy that says this is how we set up our database, honestly, no accountant in the world is probably going to say, I would use, if you're using a Mongo database, I would use a 1024 level of, size of cache, and they're not going to say that to you. They're just going to look that you have it. But for the most part, it's all best effort. So go ahead and do your best effort, and you'll pass that, unless it's something simple like if you do a background check or not, that kind of thing. So it sounds scary because you're like, is the auditor going to pass me? Yeah, he's an accountant. He's not an IT person. He's not a system administrator. He doesn't go, well, your your login interval is, your the amount of time you allow for login interval is too low. They're not going to do that. So be aware. All right. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week. More SOC 2 compliance. Have a great weekend.